Greetings, and welcome to this brief introduction to Plato's dialogue, The Sophist. Now, pretty much no one these days calls himself a sophist. It's an insult, thanks largely to Plato. But that doesn't mean that people don't pretend to be wise. So it still matters a great deal to distinguish the pretenders from the real thing. That's what this dialogue is all about. Who's the, so to speak, real sophist? Now, the Athenians had their answer. They thought Socrates was a sophist, and they killed him for it, not long after this very dialogue. But for now, Socrates has gathered with the young mathematician Theaetetus, Theaetetus' friend young Socrates, their teacher Theodorus, and a stranger from the Greek colony of Elea. Theodorus introduces the stranger to Socrates as a real man, philosophic. Theodorus seems to think that philosophers are real men. Socrates one-ups Theodorus. He compares philosophers to gods. He playfully wonders if the stranger is a god, since gods often travel in the guise of strangers. If so, maybe he's a refutative god. To Socrates, refutation seems like an especially godlike behavior. Now, Socrates says that philosophers and gods are both hard to spot. Just as gods may wander in the guise of strangers, philosophers take on all sorts of appearances. The real ones, not the make-believe. Apparently, it's easy to discern fake philosophers. They're the ones calling themselves philosophers. Sometimes, Socrates says, philosophers take the guise of sophists, sometimes politicians, sometimes madmen. So, he asks the stranger, are philosopher, sophist, and statesman one or three? That is the question that animates the sophist and its sister dialogue, the statesman. The stranger answers quite readily, there were three. But it is not small or easy to define what each is. In the rest of the dialogue, the stranger attempts to define the sophist. Rather than doing so through a long speech, he defines the sophist in conversation with Theaetetus by dividing and collecting the arts related to or constitutive of sophistry. Let's look briefly at the 6 divisions that he offers. After demonstrating his method with the small example of fishing, the stranger offers these 5 divisions or definitions of the sophist. First, the sophist is a hunter of human beings, especially rich young men, to whom he holds himself out as a teacher. Second, the sophist is a traveling salesman of education and virtue. Third, the sophist stays put in his own city and sells his own ideas. Fourth, the sophist is a contestant in verbal battles who fights not just to show off, but to make money. Fifth, the sophist purifies the soul through refutation, removing the greatest ignorance, the belief that you know what you do not. Now think for a moment. Who do we know who loved to talk with young men about virtue, who stayed put in his own city, Athens, was unbeatable in dialogue, loved refuting, and proclaimed his own ignorance? Yep, Socrates, who's listening silently as the stranger and Theaetetus speak. Now, since the sophist can refute pretty much anyone, he seems to know pretty much everything. But this omniscience is an appearance, an image that will form the basis of the 6th and last division, which occupies the rest of the dialogue. In this long section, the question of the sophist leads to the question of the status of images, which in turn leads to the question of non-being, which leads in turn to the question of being. Now, this seems quite a plunge. Why do they go so deep? Because the question of being is at the heart of philosophy, and their ultimate task, which propelled them on the hunt for the sophist, was to define the philosopher. Now, in any event, the stranger eventually completes the 6th division. The sophist, he asserts, is an image maker who operates on the basis of opinion, not knowledge. He's afraid of being found out, so he's ironic. And he operates with short speeches in private, which cause his interlocutors to contradict themselves. Again, the resemblance is to Socrates, that ironic, refuting knower of his own ignorance, are unmistakable. So the sophist and philosopher seem quite alike. What sets them apart? Perhaps it is their end or goal. The philosopher's end seems to be knowledge of being, of what is, the truth. Philosophers are wholeheartedly devoted to this end. The sophist's goal, in contrast, seems consciously indeterminate. Is it getting students, or fame, or money? Even if it's money, that is a means to something else. It is indeterminate. Sophists are always with us, and due to their very freedom from attachment to a specific end, they take on a variety of shapes and forms. But maybe they thereby highlight what's special about philosophers. Philosophers may take an interest in young pupils, they may speak about human excellence or virtue, they may be great at winning arguments, they may even purify the soul thereby. But none of these things is essential to their being. That determination belongs alone to the truth. Thank you for joining this brief introduction to Plato's Sophist by Wise Counsel Research.